Oh there, Crispin. How's it going?
Hello, how nice to meet you.
Likewise, likewise. And can you introduce yourself, Christine?
Uh,
Christine.
yes, so I'm Crispin Harris. Uh, I do all sorts of things. I've been an actor, writer, teacher, coach, uh, all sorts of things. And yeah, nice to meet you today.
Likewise, likewise. I was taking a look at your profile and it seemed like you've done a lot of things, man, in your life.
I have, yes.
And out of all the things that you mentioned, all the professions, which one is your top favorite? Which is your favorite?
That's a very interesting question. I think I tend to like the thing that I'm doing at that particular time.
Okay.
So
Hmm.
there's definitely been stages of my life and phases of my life where unusual things have come along, and everything always comes to me without me asking.
Hmm. Wow.
So, so for instance, for 4 years I was a butler,
Okay.
and I really enjoyed doing that. So yeah, there we go. I met all sorts of people as a result of that. Uh, Met Duke of Edinburgh and various nobility and all sorts of things. Yeah, it's
Hmm.
good.
Makes sense. And your recent post, it says that living home again. What does it mean by that? Can you take us through that, Crispin?
Oh yes, yes. Okay, so that's part of my podcast.
Okay.
Uh, and uh, it's all about storytelling, my podcast. And part of what I'm doing is telling the story of my life and
Hmm.
using that as an illustration for people about how they could tell the story of their lives.
Okay.
And the point that we're at the moment is I've just, in the podcast, I've just left home again to go to university because I went to boarding school, English
Hmm.
boarding school. So I was used to leaving home, but this time I was leaving to go to university. So it was a very different experience.
Right after this conversation, I'm gonna check out some podcast of yours because for me also, like I wanna learn how to, have the art of storytelling because it's not everyone's cup of tea to do this, right?
Yes, that's right. And I think if people are interested and want to find out through my podcast, the actual sort of outlines of storytelling I did in the first year. I'm just going into my third year of podcasting.
Okay.
In the first year, I talked about the origins of Western storytelling and where it came from and how we can make use of some of the elements and ideas in there in the way that we tell stories. So I started off with the Greeks, but I also explained why English storytelling is so rich. And that's basically because England was invaded by so many different people. So we started off with obviously the pagan tribes of the Celts and the way that they told stories. But then the Romans came along and they were obviously telling the stories of the Mediterranean, sunshine and sea stories and traveling across the waves to different islands. And then we were invaded by uh, the Germanic tribes, the Angles and Saxons and Jutes, and all of their storytelling was about darkness and woods and forests and all of that. So that came into our storytelling. And then we were invaded by the Vikings. And of course, we got all of those fantastic Norse mythology myths
Hmm.
coming into our stories. And as you know, English is like an alien monster. And whatever it meets, it sucks it up. And it doesn't get rid of what it has before. It just gets bigger and does things. In those rather very dangerous and difficult times when England, specifically the East India Company, came to India, it sucked up, Indian ideas and language, which again came into our storytelling.
Mm.
So that's why in England, in English, we've got words like bungalow and pajamas and all those fantastically rich, exotic words because we stole them, and that's what English does. English sees a word and likes it. And so it takes it up and makes use of it.
Mm.
So that's what my podcasts have been about.
Wow, it sounds really interesting, and I'm definitely gonna check that out. And when it comes to mythologies, Crispin, are there any particular mythologies, like of any country, that you look up to, or you are always fascinated by those kind of stories?
Well, again, it would be unfair to say that I favor any one particular type of
Hmm.
storytelling because I've been exposed to so many. I should say that obviously in the medieval times, England got very, very entranced with Arabian stories, the
Okay.
stories of the Arabian Nights, and also through the trade routes, Chinese stories, and some of our most popular stories have come from there. And
Hmm.
obviously the Arabian stories have got a completely different background. They don't have fairies, they have jinns and genies and things in bottles, and in China, that's even more exotic, that storytelling, with different meanings of dragons and also we've got stories like Aladdin, which are some of our most popular stories. So I, I like anything that kind of rings a bell with me, really. Um, I have to say that I'm particularly fond of the Greeks, but I think that's only because as a little boy, that's what I was exposed to first. Um, the Greek myths and the Greek heroes and the gods and the stories of Troy, because again, they were very popular when I was a little boy. So that's what I've always gone for, really.
Hmm, makes sense. Like when I was pursuing my course in literature, I did my master's in literature at that time. In context of Greek mythology, I studied two mythologies, that is Oedipus Rex and Gilgamesh. So I'm
Yes.
a little bit acquainted with these two stories. And Oedipus Rex, I thought that this little bit some kind of bizarre, the way how it was, the whole story itself. And then I thought that it's Greek. So who am I to judge? Most of the Greek stories are like that.
Yes, but again, you see, going back to the origins of the way the Greeks thought about life,
Hmm.
and again, it's the title of one of my podcasts, Be Careful What You Wish For. Because, in Greek mythology, if you want something, you know, those whom the gods wish to punish grant their every desire, you know, and if you want something and the Greeks give it to you, it comes back at you, So it's like Midas, who wanted everything he touched to turn to gold. Well, of
Hmm.
course, he was granted that, but of course, everything he touched turned to gold, including all his family, his food, his bed. You know, when he went to the toilet turned to gold. It's just, it's just the way the gods punish people.
Hmm.
And, the thing with Oedipus, which is so interesting, is uh, that all of that story of Oedipus comes about because various people should have told other people their secrets and they didn't. And as a result, everything goes wrong. So, again, we can see that element coming into all kinds of other storytelling, the truth, speak the truth because the truth will set you free, and that's what happens in Oedipus. If someone had told Oedipus that he was adopted, he would never have left his city, and gone back to Thebes, but they didn't. If someone had told um, Oedipus that there was a prophecy over him, back at Thebes, he wouldn't have gone there. So that's the whole thinking behind it. It's the cleverness of it. And of course, as you realize yourself, in the process of telling the story, the Greeks invent the first detective story because Oedipus is, investigating the death of the previous king. Now,
Mhm.
what's so brilliant about that is that, in fact, he's investigating a murder and he's the murderer. And that's very Greek, and that's what I loved about it. I loved all those sort of twists and turns. They do say, don't they, that there's only seven basic stories and four of them are Greek. So, that's why we go back to the Greeks for our storytelling.
And Crispin, I would love to ask you questions about Indian mythology. Like, are you acquainted with it? Indian mythologies.
Now, I've only really come across Indian mythology in a much smaller way,
Okay.
uh, and that's only because of, again, storytelling and reading the effect of Indian storytelling on English storytelling. But again, that panoply of gods and goddesses, which is in Indian storytelling, completely fascinated me. But I didn't get as involved in Indian storytelling as I have with other storytellings.
Hmm.
And it's interesting that it's not really until the end of the 19th century, when England was in India causing havoc, that you get such a lot of Indian storytelling effect on British storytelling. And you get lots of Indian characters and the way that stories are told coming through within that, uh, I suppose we could call it in this country, exoticism, which became very, very popular at that particular time, both in visual arts, storytelling, music, poetry. Suddenly, all things to do with what we unfortunately did on the Raj become very popular in English storytelling. One of my favourite writers is Wilkie Collins. And if people don't know Wilkie Collins, it would pay huge dividends to have a little look at him. Um, and one of his most famous stories is called The Moonstone. And that's about a precious jewel that was stolen from a statue, an Indian statue, by someone being in India and bringing it back to England, and all the havoc and trouble that caused in people's lives. And of course, we get mysterious Indian characters appearing in that story because they are hunting down that particular jewel. So it's things like that that struck me when I was younger. And I have to say that Wilkie Collins is a genius. He was a friend of Charles Dickens. Again, there's a couple of podcasts about him. He was a friend of Charles Dickens, and they spoke a lot and had a lot of influence on each other. There he is.
Hmm.
Yes, wrote some amazing. So again, the Moonstone introduces us to the whole idea of a policeman as a detective investigating a crime. And then Dickens did that same thing at a similar time in writing Bleak House. Uh, and of course, the other great Wilkie Collins story is The Woman in White, uh, which again is fantastic because you think it's a ghost story and it isn't. So it's again well worth the things. He also really relished the idea of, as the story goes through, it's narrated by different people who only have their view of what's happening, but you as the reader know what's happened through the viewpoint of other people, and that's brilliant storytelling using a variety of narrators, some of them reliable and some of them unreliable. So yeah, that's great storytelling.
Okay. Oh. And if you ever wish to, like, jump into the mythologies of India, like there are two great epics given by India. That is, the world's biggest epic is Mahabharata, and the second one is Ramayana. So if you ever feel like you want to learn, This
Yes, I saw a fantastic theatrical adaptation of one of those, which Peter Brook, who was fascinated by storytelling and was a great English director, he adapted a lot of the stories for his um, company. I only saw a little bit of it because it was an amazing piece, which, had they played the whole thing through, I think lasted about 24 hours because it's a great big story. So, but I saw a little bit of it, and again, I was fascinated by it. So, yeah, I will. I'll have a look at that and get back to you.
Yeah, sure, sure. And apart from books, stories, what else, Crispin, drives you towards creativity? What else do you do that makes you more creative?
Oh gosh, what can I say? Well, I did a music degree, so music is obviously fascinating to me. And for a long time, I was a professional singer.
Oh, okay.
So got involved in all sorts of things, including opera. So that was a very big creative input in my life, and music has been a major part of my life all the way through my life.
Wow.
Um, what else do I do? Well, obviously, as an actor, I've been in lots of plays, and I'm fascinated, especially by the works of Shakespeare. And
Hmm.
I've done a lot of work with Shakespeare, both being in Shakespeare and also teaching people about Shakespeare, and especially the way that Shakespeare actually directs the plays within his own writing. There are a set of sort of rules which Shakespeare wrote into the different ways that he wrote people's characters and parts, which not only tell you everything about them, but even how you move about the stage. Because remember, when Shakespeare was writing, there were no directors. So the actors had to move about the stage themselves. And I had a go at doing some of this with a company called the Original Shakespeare Company, where we put on uh, various of his plays without rehearsing them, but just following his rules. And we did it at Shakespeare's Globe, the reconstruction of the Globe in London. And that was a fascinating process. So that gets me really excited. Shakespeare gets me really excited. So I've done a lot of work with Shakespeare.
And I guess you would be the right person to ask this question, Crispin. Like when I used to study for my literature, my professor and I, we often talked about that. There is always a deep debate going on around Shakespeare that some critics believe that not all the stories of Shakespeare were written by him. It was written by someone else, and Shakespeare took the stories like his own. So, what's your take
Oh
on
yes, but there was in that at that particular time, the original stories existed in all sorts of forms. There's even a version of Hamlet before Shakespeare.
Okay.
Uh, however, uh, because he puts his own spin on, I mean, everybody, as I say, there are only seven stories, so there's going to be versions of all sorts of things. Um, but the genius of Shakespeare is that he manages to turn them into the investigations of the human condition in
Hmm.
such a way that whatever you are feeling, whatever circumstance you are in, Shakespeare has a way of being absolutely perfect about what you're feeling in one of his characters. Yeah, the amazing thing about Shakespeare, and we're so lucky. I know this sounds strange. I know this sounds a very strange thing to say. Excuse me, laughing, but it's true that we were very fortunate that Shakespeare didn't live long enough to rewrite his plays for publication.
Hmm. Oh.
What's brilliant about Shakespeare is that the versions of Shakespeare that we've got, the first folio, are actually taken from the texts that were prepared for the actors. So, and again, it's later people that have mucked them up,
Hmm.
people that have edited Shakespeare. I didn't realize till I was a little bit older and I went into all of this, how many changes editors make to the works of Shakespeare. Sometimes you go into a speech of Shakespeare and look at what he wrote in the folio, and then look at how people have edited it. And I believe that sometimes there's as many as a dozen changes that editors have made to make it make more sense. And doing really stupid things. Um, I'm going to quote from the Scottish play, so just be aware that something terrible might well happen, because Macbeth is notoriously you're not supposed to quote from it. But there's a speech in Macbeth, the Scottish play, which says that we're taught by the bank and uh, school of time, and that makes complete sense because school is where people went to school, so you were taught by it, and a bank was an Elizabethan word for a bench. So, of course, people in school sat on a bench. So we're taught by the bank and school of time. And all editors change it into we are taught by the bank and shoal of time, as though it was to do with fishes. And what's that got to? It's complete rubbish. So, you've got to be really careful when you read Shakespeare. If you want to read Shakespeare, read the first folio, and then you're actually reading what Shakespeare wrote.
Okay, wow. That's something really deep and insightful. And on that note, Crispin, I guess I won't hold you any longer. And I wish that this podcast would be really helpful for my viewers. And it was really nice having you as a guest on my podcast, Crispin. Thank you for your time.
Lovely. Well, thank you for asking me, and I wish well to all your students. And as I say, if you want to contact me, you can do it through channel, and that would be lovely. Okay. Bye
Definitely.
bye.
I'm already looking forward to your with like having you as a guest on my next podcast. So I'll bother you.
Okay. Yes, no, I'll definitely come back. Yeah, so it's
Okay.
fine.
Thank you, man.
Okay. Bye bye.